What's up everyone, welcome to today's video. Welcome to the Video Game Fight School channel. Thank you very much for tuning in. So today we're going to be continuing our conversation on Monolith Studios and their preparedness to drop the Wonder Woman game. The question arises from time to time as to if this game is going to be a cross-gen game, basically PS4, Xbox One, or if it's just going to be relegated to the PS5 and Series X and S generations. The answer to that is kind of interesting, but let's look at what their capabilities are. And I think at the end of the day, you might be able to make some kind of a conclusion onto this matter by yourself. So we'll start with the speculative stuff. So just this year, a news outlet called Segment pretty much talked about a job listing that Monolith had put together for a position, or I think a few positions, seeking senior and advanced systems engineers to develop state-of-the-art rendering technology for PS5, Series X, and PC for its in-development Wonder Woman game. Now, both listings, this is the report, require the candidates to also have experience developing for either Xbox One or PlayStation 4, preferably both, which suggests that Wonder Woman will end up as a cross-gen release and not be limited to just the current generation flagships of Sony and Microsoft. So this is speculative, and in my opinion, I think there might be some salt behind it or some weight behind it. And the reason I say that is if you think about when they released, Shadow of War, I think they probably immediately, sometime in the next year or two, would have started with this Wonder Woman game. Around that time, we already started hearing rumors about the new generation of consoles, and I think maybe sometime in their development or conceptualization, they may have gotten their development kits in order for them to work on. So even while they were probably, building this game, they probably were building it on the Xbox One and the PS4 at the time that they probably started it. So this is where my speculation lies. But the question is, would they be able to adapt the game for the new gen even after they've already started working on it, or if they had already started working on a past generation? And the answer to that is kind of yes again, because if you actually go back, we do have some kind of an inadvertent confirmation to this effect. You see, in 2017, I think I referenced this video in my last, small short editorial where I talked about Linus Tech actually doing a little walk around the game studio of Monolith. He did this in November 6th of 2017. And you can see here, this was actually sponsored by Xbox, because at that time, this is a development kit, by the way. This is what an Xbox One in the developer's hands look like. And this was, I think, the time where the Xbox One X and One S were being, touted by Microsoft. So what they were talking about in this particular segment was how they were able to adapt the game to have the ability to support the new display capabilities of the Xbox, basically the new HDR features and all of that stuff. And Linus was talking about how the engineers were able to, deal with the game's lighting and make it adapt itself for those platforms as well as the older platforms, which is quite interesting that he said that. And then something else was quite interesting as well. Now, at this time, 4K was not necessarily as ubiquitous as it is now, if you get what I mean. I mean, yes, it was starting to pick up a lot more steam, but we weren't necessarily talking about true 4K gaming, if you understand what I mean. But he did say that the Firebird engine, and this is one of the lighting engineers working on it in real time, he said the Firebird engine actually had the capability to render items because of the way the engine actually builds its physical objects and real world measurements. He mentioned something that it was actually capable of rendering for higher quality machines if the need arises. He even went ahead to show some of the artists working on their textures and said their textures are actually developed with the highest textures and then eventually scaled to suit whatever platforms they wanted, to adapt the game for. Now, like I said, this was quite interesting because little did Linus know, probably at that time, that they may have been behind some closed doors working on potentially a Wonder Woman game, maybe writing it down on paper or whatever it is. Now, if you go ahead and watch the documentary, he even mentions a few things about their server room, about where they store data. And he said, their internet seemed to be really interesting because it was a very high capability internet, and it seemed like they were probably using it to store things like 8K and 12K textures in order for them to be able to get the highest quality assets and all of the above. Now, I'm certain that many studios do this, but we have not necessarily heard anyone necessarily talk about those technical aspects of a studio. But here we have Monolith in the spotlight, and they're basically being highlighted to have done this. In fact, if you were wondering, he actually could not even go into that server room. In fact, it said no photography, especially Linus. They basically blocked him out of their server room, and he was wondering why. And I recommend that you watch this, and it was so interesting for him to even reference that that's possibly what they were going to be storing in there. So I think this studio, being a studio that's a world-class studio in my mind, has what it takes to be able to provide both games in the best possible quality, in whatever form or fashion, or in whatever platform that's needed to be able to deliver the game for all gamers if possible. Now the question is if they would actually confirm this, and if Warner Brothers would want for this to be the case. And I think that's where the question actually lies. But when it comes to say, is it possible for them to be able to do it and do a good job at it, I think the answer to that is yes. Now, something that's really interesting and really cool is, because of new consoles and all of the above, you also have to say, well, how are we to know that these games can run in higher quality? Well, you also have to remember that Shadow of War and Shadow of Mordor actually are PC games as well. And if anything, back then, they were very, very huge staples to actually use to, to do benchmarks for PC games. In fact, if you watch a lot of PC, and GPU game benchmark videos, you'll notice that Shadow of War and Shadow of Mordor were almost always on the list of games that were used. So in that high quality, I'm certain that they can actually develop these games to pretty much work on the new consoles, which pretty much are better hardware and are able to do a very good job. But so far, so good. I'll stop here, and I would love for you to comment about all of these so far. I mean, it's interesting just to see that all the details that we need are hiding around the internet. Who knows what else we'll be able to unearth about this studio who has not necessarily been in the spotlight, but them making a Wonder Woman game seems like it's going to really thrust them forward, and everyone's going to be able to see how much of a talented studio they really are. But like I say always, I'd love to hear your thoughts in the comment section. Talk to me, and hopefully we'll talk in another one. Peace out.